Well, hello. I'm here with Alan, and we're going to talk about green programming. But first, Alan's got a privacy bill.
Yes, the US Congress is actually finally looking to do something about privacy on the internet. Finally, sort of, if they can reach any kind of bipartisan consensus, which is so difficult to do these days. But it looks like it's actually making progress this time. There might finally be some kind of federal data privacy law. The issue is now that the companies that would stand to lose by this bill are very actively lobbying against it. And they've increased their spending in the second quarter of 2022, this according to Politico. And we're not talking about huge amounts of money here, actually. We're talking about less than $2 million. In fact, it's closer to around $1 million. So it's a little disappointing, 1.5 million, give or take. You would think that 1.5 million wouldn't actually be able to get you very much on Capitol Hill, but politicians come cheap these days. So
Yeah.
one of the more interesting things about this spate of lobbying is who's putting in the money these days, who's actually spending money on lobbying. And it isn't who you might think, at least according to this breakdown. The top five are RELX, which I do not know actually, TransUnion, Experian, everybody's most hated data broker, Axiom, and LiveRamp, with RELX being the biggest spender by far at $630,000.
Are these the people that resell private data?
In part, yes. Well, they're data brokers, yeah.
Okay.
So they collect and then sell that data.
Okay, I was thinking it was going to be like Meta and YouTube, but they're just the customers, the downline from these guys,
Well,
right?
not necessarily. I think they might not be included in the statistics here because they have other lines of business too.
Okay.
But yes, these are companies that are more targeted, shall we say, in their activities than Meta and Google.
And so they're the ones responsible for all the spam we get, but they're sort of invisible.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, if I don't know what would happen to these companies if the restrictions really cut off some of their business.
It might end their business model. I don't know if this happens in Europe. I'm thinking with GDPR, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, well, with TransUnion and Experian, I think so much of the credit system is built on top of these companies that I don't know what would happen without them.
Yeah, maybe it's time to find out. All right, and I've got one here where they did a survey of IT people in hospitals and found that 1/4 of them admit that the ransomware attacks they experienced led to increased mortality of patients. Now, there's only one case where there's a lawsuit coming from one individual person who claims that a specific cyber attack caused that one person to die. But of course, in a less directed way, ransomware attacks cause delays and administrative problems, and delays cause people to die. So this is it seems kind of obvious, but it's closer to real evidence that these ransomware attacks are directly impacting people's lives. So that may help people try to get something closer to concrete evidence to motivate their management to implement mitigation measures.
Somehow, I think not. After the response to COVID, for example, we've lost over 1 million Americans, and there hasn't really been all that much outrage about it. So cyber
Well, there
attacks,
has been huge outrage in the sense of resisting the vaccine mandates.
yes, right. Yeah. Excuse me.
But I don't think anybody has the same tender delight towards ransomware. I haven't even heard Republicans saying, let's defend the ransomware, let's have more ransomware, right?
It's coming. It's coming. If you were to say this ransomware is coming from Russia and Putin is behind it, you would immediately get the support of Rand Paul. Rand Paul would say, I am pro malware. I am pro ransomware. It is a good thing.
Well, you could make
freedom.
money as a consultant to the ransomware companies, helping them sell their agenda.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe they understood that. I think it's hard to understand American politics from outside. Lord knows
I
it's
think
hard
it's
enough from
hard.
the inside.
Yeah, it's hard enough to understand it inside from inside.
Yeah. Anyway, but you got the plan to fight extremism.
Yeah, after Mudge came out with the whistleblower filing against Twitter, it seems to have shaken the tree a little bit. And there is now a big article on The Verge about how Twitter had a plan to more aggressively go after some of the abuse on the platform. And they had a team of only 15 that was actually empowered to make some real changes and try to make a difference on this. And it had been apparently given some greater priority. But when Elon Musk came onto the scene and offered to pay, what was it, $42 billion for Twitter, this team was disbanded. In fact, a bunch of people were fired while they were on a company retreat. And so it seems that Twitter's priority shifted overnight because of Musk's proposed takeover. And I guess they wanted to cover a few things up, or they wanted to prioritize a few other things. I don't understand why they would have to fire people, but at least the people they kept on, they shifted over to tackling the bots and spam issues. That was what Musk was using as his excuse to get out of the takeover.
Yep.
And so this rather lengthy article just chronicles the whole situation and how it all went down. But it does appear that, first of all, a team of 15, you would think that they would actually try to create a bigger team to have a more functional, socially responsible service. But I mean, 15 is at least something. But after this went down, there was no team, and the company just stopped this work altogether, which is not to say that they're not filtering anymore. They're still filtering some. And I think they pay a number of companies to do this work offshore. But this is more of a higher level policy level, more sophisticated, shall we say, effort to crack down on it.
Well, I think for when Elon first came out, they thought he was really going to buy it. And he said he was going to move them to the right and let Trump back on. So then fighting misinformation would be contrary to that agenda. And that, I think, put Twitter in the same position as CNN. CNN is trying to move to the right. They're trying somehow to get more viewers from the right to try to present some news that won't discuss those people, which I think is a hopeless cause, but Twitter's trying to do the same thing, or they were for a while.
That's an interesting analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's to be clear, this effort that they had, this internal effort, wasn't to shift the platform's discourse towards the right. It was just removing clearly, blatantly abusive behavior.
Well, I know, but that is, I believe that counts as moving to the left from the viewpoint of the people on the right.
Perhaps so, yes.
Like, the reason why they regard CNN as leftist is because they have been reluctant to just publish complete lies.
Mm-hmm.
And that means you'll never get any of the people on the right.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly not all about libertarianism. And so, quote unquote, free speech, because Twitter was recently, up until very recently, looking to monetize adult content.
Yeah.
And then, as we've discussed on this podcast, and then at the last minute, they realized, oh, we can't do anything about all the inevitable
child porn.
Well, yeah, child abuse and sexual abuse content that would come up. So
yeah, they decided that was too risky a business to get into.
Right.
Although, putting out news content is pretty risky business. But one thing about Twitter is before they kicked off Trump, they actually had a whole lot of the right people on there. So Twitter, unlike CNN, actually had a recent time in the past when they were widely used by people on the right. And so that's essentially what Elon wanted to do, is to go back to that. And that is probably achievable.
That's a good point.
Yeah. But I don't think anybody and I think when Elon came in, and that there was no longer any clue who was actually running Twitter. I mean, Jack was still around. Yeah.
There seems to have been something of a freak out on the executive level. A bunch of people got fired at all different levels of the organization, and it seemed like their priorities shifted overnight. And I suppose some figures that stood to benefit from this, i.e., people holding a lot of shares in the company, knew that this was the lifeline, like this was the chance to cash out. And so they were clinging to any opportunity. Which they know Twitter is a sinking ship. So they wanted to get as much money out of it as they could. And 42 or 44 billion, that is a lot of money.
Oh yeah. I mean, anything to make that sale go through would be the solution. The internal fighting reminds me of what's happening in the Kremlin. I mean, I was real surprised to see today that one of Vladimir Putin's cronies fell off his boat and drowned accidentally, because the people that oppose him are the ones that fall out of hospital windows. And so apparently the pro-Putin people are being murdered in addition to the anti-Putin people. So that may reflect a power shift there.
Yeah, although this fellow in question, he didn't seem terribly important. He's some kind of like vice, was it vice head of military weapons research or something rather obscure like that. So.
Yeah, but I think he was clearly on Putin's team. He was not Putin's opponent, and that means you've got like a mob war, and you start shooting those minor lieutenants.
Well, Putin has retreated to his palace in Sochi. He canceled meetings. This is the rumor. He canceled meetings with his generals, and he went off to his palace. And at about the same time, according to Ukrainian sources, Ukrainian media, the Russian military stopped sending in new units into Ukraine.
And so maybe Ukraine is actually going to win this thing.
That is the thinking.
Maybe Putin will actually fall. I've sort of given up hope of either of those things happening.
He's probably in greater danger now than at any other point during his rule.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
I hope they get rid of him.
Yeah. But then again, this is all hearsay and rumors. So.
But that's all you're ever going to get.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, anyway, Google has spun out a separate company being formed out of Google with a lot of Google intellectual property being contributed to it, called Illyria. And this is a pretty interesting company. And what they're going to do is address the fact that on moving planes and ships, they have miserable internet because they're doing things like satellite connections that don't work that well. And they're developing a new technology to use tight beam laser transmissions through the atmosphere and through weather, they say, to have high-speed data transmitted to moving planes and such. So it sounds pretty science fiction-y, but that's what they're doing. A laser communications technology on an exponentially greater scale and speed than anything that exists today. So it will be interesting to see what they come up with.
It's an interesting project, but what's striking to me is that Google decided to spin it out as a separate company.
Well, yeah, that is a little strange, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a pretty big departure from what they've done in the past, it seems.
Well, you know, the new Satya, the guy in charge of Google, has been cutting things and saying he's got to tighten up the team and conserve money.
Yeah, right. Well, I wonder if the company's becoming more mature, and they've never really had a big success beyond their core product of advertising. As hard as they've tried, and much money they've thrown at various companies and projects, and some very ambitious projects too. Nothing's ever really come of those.
Yeah, that's why I think maybe he's trying to tighten up and stop wasting so much money on side projects that don't go anywhere.
Yeah, and so maybe the spinning it out really is a more effective way of doing things. After all, that's how more conventional companies often will do it. You know, they might recognize an opportunity and then they'll actually spin out a separate company to do that.
Yeah, that might be it. All right, and you've got the big story, the green programming.
Yeah, this was very, very interesting. And this is actually not breaking news. This dates back to 2021.
Mhm.
But some researchers decided to figure out, well, what are the most green, most energy efficient computer programming languages? And this is actually a really important consideration if you consider how much of the world runs on code and how much electricity is consumed by devices that are running code, be it everything from your laptop to your phone to data centers. If we're really concerned about energy consumption, we should probably take a look at programming languages. And turns out that they really do have a huge range of power consumption. And so what this study found was that the most efficient programming language is C, which shouldn't come as a surprise. As a lower level, high level programming language,
But they don't include assembler.
no, they don't.
But that's
But
essentially what C is, really.
yes, I think they're just looking at
High level.
high level programming languages. You know, if they were to include binary here, then well coded binary would be the most efficient by far.
Well, that's essentially what C is, really.
Yeah, yeah. So C gets a little closer to that than anything else. So the top three are C, Rust, and C++. So that's Rust. I mean, good show to Rust, a newer programming language that's really coming up in the world and is only a tiny bit less efficient than C. That's quite impressive.
And much more secure.
Yeah. And Java is number 5, surprisingly.
Yeah, that surprised me. Java only twice as much energy as C. I would have thought a whole lot more because of that whole Java virtual machine stuff.
Yeah. So if we set the C's energy consumption at 1, that is our benchmark,
Yeah.
then at the opposite end of this ranking, we get the 3 worst offenders, and they are Ruby, Python, and Perl at the very bottom. And again, C is at 1, Ruby's at 69.91. So that is a huge difference. Python is 75.88 and Perl is 79.58. I think Perl and Ruby are kind of on the way out. You really don't hear so much about them, and they're not used as widely. But Python, of course, is only getting more popular, so that's not so good there from a energy use standpoint.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed Python to be that much worse than Java.
Yeah, that's right. It's significantly worse. And there are some surprises here in this list. A lot of these languages seem to be not bad. In fact, the top 15 or so are pretty good.
Well, to be fair, I noticed they don't have COBOL, and I kind of know why, because it runs on different hardware. It's hard to compare, but it's probably much more efficient than almost anything. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, anything that's old is more efficient.
Well, yeah, and the whole point of the mainframe COBOL is that it really is the cheapest way to do a lot of processing.
I see. Well, there's still a lot of modern technology out there, programming language technology out there that's probably pretty good. Of course, they don't talk about like web frameworks. I would be interested to know like how good is React and Angular and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
But JavaScript itself, just plain JavaScript, is only 4.45.
Well, that's true. And so that I would think they would all be pretty much the same as JavaScript then.
Yeah, you would think. But PHP, on the other hand, is 29.3.
Yeah, that seems very strange. It must be very poorly written code, I guess.
You would think. So, yeah. So I don't know really how good the methodology was here, the testing methodology, but it's certainly an interesting line of research, and I think it should be followed up some more because, after all, we are so dependent on code, and so much of our energy resources are being committed to running this code.
Yeah. But although I think from total energy consumption, it's probably browsers are the main thing being run.
Yeah, browsers.
Comparing the energy consumption of browsers might be a good thing.
Well, I know on my computer, my browsers are always chock full of hundreds of open tabs. So I am definitely not helping the situation.
Well, theoretically, an open tab should be just RAM and not CPU, but who knows?
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
I think on Chrome, it's a separate process for every tab or something.
Yeah, right. And if you've got hundreds of tabs open, things do slow down a little bit.
Yep, yep.
And the fan does start to run quite a lot.
Well,
So,
then that would be CPU then.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all right. And the last one I've got here is from NPR talking about how social media firms are planning to handle the midterms. And of course, there's going to be a flood of misinformation and lies and deceptive ads. And the short answer is they're planning to do the same stuff they did last time that did not work last time. They don't seem to have any new ideas or any new motivation or any intention of doing anything better. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok are going to just do what they did last time that didn't work. And various people are mad about it, but nobody seems to have much of a better idea. So they're going to put little tags on things, labeling them misinformation, which studies have shown is just seen as a badge of honor. And people try to get that and promote things. Look, they tagged it. That proves that the fake news hates my statement. And so on. So it's they say they're reluctant to spell out exactly how they enforce their policies because then people will game them. But anyway, I think we'll continue to have the same kind of two sides battles that we have now. And I would imagine the same amount of foreign interference that we have now.
Well, I would like to point out, not necessarily. Depending on how the war in Ukraine goes, if Ukrainian forces are able to really disrupt the Russian military, this may lead to the toppling of Putin, in which case there won't be as much interference.
Well, it would be nice to think so, but one statement is who would come after Putin? It could very well be someone even worse.
That's the great concern, of course.
However, it is possible that they might be distracted by internal things and have less interest in punching the US for a while.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the organizations that's most responsible for online disinformation, the Internet Research Organization, I think it's called,
Yeah,
which is owned by Yevgeny Prigozhin, who also owns the Wagner Group, a mercenary company that's widely used by Russia. He is one of the Prigozhin is called Putin's chef because he's one of the closest oligarchs to Putin. If Putin goes, Prigozhin's in trouble. So his operations definitely won't be very functional at that point.
okay. Well, that might help.
Yes.
Yeah, I know the other thing, I'm hearing a lot of people call for the banning TikTok, claiming that it is possible that the Chinese government would use TikTok to pollute the minds of our children, although without any evidence that they're actually doing that.
Yeah, China really hasn't been as overt in its social media disinformation campaigns, or it may just be ineffective.
Well, yeah, one thing about China is they think long term, and I think they might be aware of the consequences and care more.
I think China is more than willing to be aggressive and very publicly oppose the U.S. or try to manipulate U.S. foreign policy, for example. But I think they just don't have the capacity and capabilities that Russia has developed. This is one area where Russia is actually better than China.
Yeah, the compromise, the disinformation. Yeah, they really know how to do that. Yeah, psychological warfare.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think that's it for this one. And we'll be back on Friday.